Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jensen. Welcome back to Media and Crime, Module 1, Predators, Pictures, and Policy, Part 3. So again, going deeper into some of these concepts from the Surrett text and the concepts we'll be talking about in this class. So let's continue from last lecture on the media blurring of fact and fiction. So essentially, evolving media means less institutionalized screening and filtering of information coverage. And we talked about that where we aren't seeing editorial oversight or even fact-checking or calling people on their statements by the public. Profitability of infotainment actually cuts into news and provides an outlet for blurring fact and fiction. And we talked about infotainment like the politicized talk shows, the Judge Judy's, the reality pop shows. And essentially 24-hour, 7-day-a-week coverage pressures producers to fill more time and space in a quicker turnaround time. And that's a very expensive business to produce. We also see competition from social media cutting into the profits of traditional media organizations. And so suddenly they're having to find a way to find out how to become as relevant as a sharing service like a social media site or platform. There also is market competition, which pressures news to bring more soft personal interest stories into the hard newscasts or newspapers, because it's hard to read about a criminal that doesn't feel like someone maybe we could identify with in our own community. So you see kind of this interchange between the personal interest details and the hard news kind of a thing, the things really impacting our day and our daily life. So we'll see those themes emerge again and again. We also see a continued media blurring of fact and fiction with the speed of dissemination and saturation of information, giving stories and coverage short shelf lives. I mean, if you were to look in your email, your text messages, your social media feed, or your playlist of what happened a month ago, it would feel like forever ago, because we just are pummeled with so much information all the time. What kept your attention? What was going on at the time? We wouldn't even remember. We wouldn't have probably had this problem a few decades ago because stories lasted quite a bit longer. And this is in the current marketplace quest to keep or attract audiences in profit-based organizations. Again, when you're consuming news, when you're reading articles, they can sell the print space to advertisers, they can sell airtime to companies or web-based commercials, or promote web ads and pop-ups and stuff like that. So essentially this can turn things around very quickly, and it pushes news organizations to find new angles or frames to present someone in, whether it's accurate or not. Some common media techniques are really not geared toward factual presentations, and so we get these kinds of things. We have a reliance on sound bites, hearing phone calls and statements from people. People having talking points or bullet lists of things that they need to say. We also see dueling ideologues, kind of commentary versus commentary, and these people really kind of playing out that battle. You also get color commentators, where we have to kind of create some perspective or opinion on an unfolding scene. And then you get an image or picture that says it all, right? Where we get those highly liked and shared images and video files that turn into viral videos. Additionally, you see a core set of crime and justice images developed in media. So it's funny, you'll look at a news story of crime, and it's like you always see crime scene tape, and you always see flashing red and blue lights, and the back of a police car. It's like stock images that they just recycle and use all the time, because they give us those sensory images to help us know, hey, something dramatic is happening right now, because you wouldn't see any of this stuff unless it was. So it tries to cue you in and draw you into the story that is being shared, but those images are the same. It's kind of like the classic way to do a crime news story. It's really drawn from less routine and more exceptional crimes. So it's not that we're going to see all that dramatic stuff for every single crime out there, but if you're doing a crime story, you must show police tape and you must have red and blue flashing lights, even though it was a petty theft. There's emphasis on predatory crime, violence, and stranger relationships, because again, those are much more dramatic and sensationalized. We also see what we call looping, and Surratt talks about this a lot in your book. Looping is really events and information repeatedly cycled in a 24/7 coverage period and recycled in different forms into our culture to reemerge in different contexts. And so you see this especially with social media, where we're making statements about things that matter to us, maybe things like racism or sexism, a political cause, or some other kind of story that we think is symbolic or describes something bigger or more important beyond the story itself. Here's another example. So you see a police car chase video from the courtroom played over and over again by lots of news programs. It's then reenacted into some kind of comedy movie before it's clipped into various internet postings and turned into things like memes. We see that over and over again, right? And that's some of where comedy draws its content from, is we look at real life events and we start to poke fun at them and do that. And you see this in a lot of situational comedies, sitcoms on TV, where we feel like we're seeing something that really happened, but now being played out in some kind of laughable way. Crime and justice as mediated experience. So again, these are presentations and lenses and formats that are really sifted through to present the most compelling story. So the evolution of media has really changed how others' experiences are presented to us because we don't have that first-hand account available. Modern media can really bring it closer to home, and suddenly we start identifying with all the people we know that has ever lost a child, or anyone else that's ever had something stolen, or any of our own experiences of witnessing violence. It may even allow us to interact with it, voting on an issue, posting, making a comment, sharing. But really the experiences of others are still highly mediated. They are filtered and interpreted for us, and that mediation may also blur fact and fiction. So research goes to show our first-hand experiences are the most powerful, but most of us do not have first-hand experiences to draw from when it comes to crime, thank goodness. But that means we look to other things to try to get a perception and inform our thinking of how things are. That's not wrong, and we're not wrong for doing it. It's just how we construct our own versions of reality and set things aside in our brains to understand things better. But sometimes we aren't aware of the inaccuracies that come with it. So in conclusion, when we look at this mediated experience, I want you to consider 5 of these considerations. So first, visual electronic media dominate the landscape. This is also processed differently than print stimuli. So just reading texts and things like that, it just doesn't have that same emotional appeal. It's a much more logical appeal. So we have a very emotional sense of what someone is going through when we see their torment and their victimization played out in front of us. Or we see something as purely evil from an offender. We also have another consideration of marketing shifting from broadcasting to narrowcasting. And we're going to talk more about what narrowcasting is pretty soon. But we have these very limited markets and limited storytelling that happens. So instead of broadly reaching the mass market, we now have very segmented and agenda-laden and politically leaning organizations that there's kind of one for every flavor out there. Another consideration is that media are comprised of collection of mostly for-profit organizations vying for profits, trying to sell airtime, trying to get web space, trying to get layout editors to get advertising space set aside for print consumers. And they're a profitable organization, so they have this kind of ethical compromise going on. They are challenged with telling the truth and being factual, but they're also challenged with making money and staying viable as a news organization. So sometimes those two goals have tension, and ethics come into play where we're selling out ourselves in order to stay alive as an organization. Dramatic crime content is also a proven moneymaker. And so some of that content is going to supersede other stories that are also valuable and important to tell. And I talk about this in some articles that I share with you in this class, where if all you do is watch, news media and dramatic crime, you think that the world is terrible. And that's all that's going on out there. When there are positive and successful things happening in society, but we don't see those casted very often, and they're not presented in a way that we can say, yes, there are useful, less useful, good, bad, helpful, not helpful things going on. And then finally, government is mostly hands-off when it comes to entertainment and media, and only indirectly tries to influence through information releases. Business does that as well, but it also has the power of advertising and sponsorship. So usually the things that govern the presentation of crime in the media are kind of public outcries of something being so obscene or so sensational or so vile and terrible to watch that it starts to, create new boundaries and new parameters to work within. But that's public outcry, and usually some big event has to happen to do that. So yes, we do have things like FCC oversight and those kind of things, but largely we live in a very uncensored world, and the public has to provide those boundary lines to know how far is too far. So we're going to wrap up this lecture here. This is a shorter lecture, and we'll see you in part 4. Thanks.